All right. Saw this story yesterday. Could not have been more intrigued because this is a topic that we've covered numerous times on this show. The efforts to rebuild Louisiana's coast are netting results, but they can go so much further. And part of that is getting to the root of why we need to rebuild the coast in the first place. From LSU, it says research from scientists at LSU and Indiana University, Indiana, we'll get to that, reveals that new information about the role humans have played in large-scale land loss in the Mississippi River Delta. Crucial information in determining solutions to the crisis. The study, published in Nature Sustainability, compares the impacts of different human actions on land loss and explains historical trends. Until now, scientists have been unsure about which human-related factors are the most consequential, though they had some pretty good ideas, and why the most rapid land loss in the Delta happened from the 60s to the 90s. We're joined right now by Dr. Sam Bentley from LSU. Dr. Bentley, welcome aboard. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me on board this morning.
Glad to have you in on this. This is a topic that I nerd out about all the time. I have
many of us do.
Zero educational background in this field, but it's one where you can physically look at maps of Louisiana and see the difference. And when you see the difference is alarming. Throw out political discussions on a global scale. Just look at what's in front of our face. Look at what's right down the road from us. So it's there. Let's talk about the why. What did y'all learn?
Well, we've known conceptually the problems that drive land loss in the Mississippi Delta for decades, actually close to a century. Dam construction, levee construction, and more recently we've come to understand that pulling fluids, whether they're gas or oil or water, out of the subsurface also contributes to the problem by causing the land surface to sink.
Interesting. The third one didn't occur to me. The first two feel like, just because of the way the conversation's gone over the years, they feel like those would be natural impediments to the river doing part of the job the river does. The river doesn't just move water, it moves sediment as well.
Correct.
So let's talk a little bit about how dam construction affects that.
So historically, most of the sediment that comes down the Mississippi River actually originated in the Missouri River Basin, so up in the Great Plains coming out of the Rockies. And beginning in about 1906 and extending to 1963, a series of major dams were built across the headwaters of the Missouri River system, and it basically cut off the largest sediment supply from the Mississippi River. Not all of it, but a substantial portion. And that produced a big decrease that you can see in data, especially in the 1950s with the sort of the final stages of dam construction. So that was what many people for generations looked at as kind of the smoking gun for driving land loss. And what this article does is, the way we've broken it down, is it indicates that dams are actually not the major contributor. Dam construction is not the major contributor to land loss.
Which would lead us up to levees. Is that the major contributor?
Correct. It is.
So let's talk about the why there. I think that the why on that one's pretty obvious. It's been pretty well discussed, but let's discuss it anyway, just to have everybody on the same page here. What is it that levees do that cause land loss?
Well, levees have been mostly built even since the 1700s to reduce the damage, to reduce the risk of flooding to properties along the Mississippi River. And that's been known to be an important driver of land loss since the 1800s. So this is nothing new.
Right. That being said, though, our way of life in Louisiana, a lot of it depends on those levees. I mean, we have cities in Louisiana that would disappear without those levees, do we not?
Absolutely. And we live in a heavily engineered system.
Yes.
Our restoration strategies are not built around going back to nature. They're built around using the forces that nature provides to help us with engineering strategies. And so we're trying to optimize how the system operates to get the most sediment, the most land building out of the system as possible.
You mentioned the drilling as part of this as well.
Right.
When we talk solutions, let's start with that one, because I really like where the levees and dams solution is going. It's a topic that's going to be a major headline for a couple of years moving forward. But with drilling, is there anything that can be done from the public's perspective, from just our perspective as Louisianans, but more to the point, is there anything that should be required of those who are drilling to make sure They're not leaving empty pockets that get sunk into.
Uh, that's a really good point. And as far as the management of the drilling of the reservoir process, I mean, that's really not something I can speak to.
Okay.
But what I can say is that the maximum the maximum cause of land loss driven by oil and gas extraction occurred in the late 20th century when production of oil and gas from these reservoirs was at a peak.
Right.
That production has declined. A lot of those reservoirs are going dormant, lacking production. So the land loss associated with the sinking land surface because of oil and gas extraction has declined in significance. So it's
one
less of an
exacerbates
issue.
the other.
Right.
Okay. We're talking with Dr. Sam Bentley from LSU about what causes land loss along the Mississippi or throughout the Mississippi River Delta. Solutions for the loss of land because of the levees. What are we looking at here? What's the future hold for us?
Well, the state's coastal master plan is a comprehensive plan that uses a number of different tools to both reduce the risk to human structures, to people's houses and buildings, and also to actually construct new land. The most expensive the biggest ticket option overall in the state's coastal master plan is building land by dredging. This is fast, it's effective, but it's extremely expensive, and the cost of fuel for doing this in future decades is only going to get higher. The other major tool is the construction of river sediment diversions, such as the Mid-Barataria diversion, which was permitted in December. We're expecting groundbreaking, according to CPRA, in the very near future. And that, as our article points out, that mimics natural processes, and historically, the flows that go through the natural levees of the Mississippi and create new land have been very efficient at doing that, even at relatively low sediment concentrations in the river. So it's a great tool, and we're going to be doing our best to make it work even better.
The Mid-Barataria sediment diversion, we've talked about this a number of times on the show, not you and I, but I've just overall with CPRA or whomever. It actually has become a political talking point as well, which sucks because once you get politics involved, you lose the real-life application of what works and what doesn't. The Mid-Barataria sediment diversion is going to be huge in scope. I mean, larger, like record-setting in scope.
Yes.
How does it work?
Essentially, the diversion is a large engineered hole or lock placed in the descending right-hand bank of the Mississippi River. And during periods of high flow, when sediment concentrations at their highest, the gates will be opened so that muddy and sandy water can be sluiced into the Barataria Basin wetlands to help build new land and sustain existing land. So it mimics a natural process, but it's very carefully engineered to be safer and operate more efficiently.
Now, if the river were to run free, which is not a possibility because of, we're built in pretty good. If the river were to run free, how long would it take to rebuild the land that the Mid-Barataria sediment diversion plans to rebuild?
That is a really interesting question. I don't have an answer for that specifically. Generally speaking, these sort of Barataria Basin scale sedimentation sort of acts operate over natural life cycles of about 75 to 150 years. So my hunch is, completely unconstrained by a lot of scientific research, is that the land growth would take place over the same time scale that we're talking about for the master plan, which is 5 decades or so. So it's a long-term commitment, long-term process.
Which, by the way, our entire show is uncontained by scientific research. So that's kind of how we roll over here. Dr. Sam Bentley's our guest. Okay, 5 decades is less than 75 to 150 years.
Right.
So in theory, man can do in less time what it would take nature to redo. And to go along with that, what is going to be done with the Mid-Barataria is very intentional. There is aim, there is direction, there is this sediment needs to go from this place to this place, not just a wild river, swinging back and forth all crazy like between New Orleans and Lafayette and anywhere in between.
Right.
So is it possible, and I realize I'm like shooting the moon with this question, but is it possible that we can do it better than nature?
I would say we can't necessarily do it better than nature, but we can do it more safely
Okay.
than nature.
Okay. Meaning protecting that which has already been
Protecting the resources that we need to protect, like opening the gates in times that are less impactful to natural ecosystems, to spawning fish and shrimp,
Mhm.
and maximizing the sediment capture.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was hoping to get to that as well. Let's talk about those natural ecosystems because pushback on the mid-Barrett sediment diversion is coming from shrimpers and oyster farmers and whatnot. What will the impacts look like there? Are we going to see a reduction in production or just a movement a little bit further away from where they have to go to ply their trade?
The scientific research that I'm familiar with, and I'm a geologist, not an ecologist, does indicate that the net production associated with the delta should possibly increase slightly. But as you suggest, the location of that productivity would shift because
Right.
a lot of these organisms are keyed into particular salinity, and we're in a lot of the Barataria Basin now is saltier than it was historically,
Mhm.
By putting fresh water in, we're changing the salinity and sort of will be displacing habitat.
Got about 3 minutes left with Dr. Sam Bentley from LSU, and I've got about 17, 18 more questions to go. So, no, just we'll,
10 seconds per question.
We'll try to narrow this down as best we can. What does it look like when it's done? Now, let me elaborate on that. When coastal protection builds a barrier island, you can see terra firma. You could visualize pelicans can come back home and nest on an island. What does a sediment diversion look like to the naked eye? Is it visible to see the results?
We should be able to see the results near the outfall within years to a decade. I haven't seen the most recent projections, but the sand deposition the sandbars that build near the outfall from the channel should develop rather quickly.
Okay. How far in does that go? Like, will you walk? Because when you look at all the little snaky lines down, and will this build more thick pieces of the map?
Yes. In fact, some of the work that other work that the same team that published this paper has done shows that let's call it the radius of influence of a diversion, the
Okay.
distance over which it will help build land, is on the order of about 15 to 20 miles. So, and of course, that will be a very subtle influence, and it'll build over time. But you'll be sustaining wetlands across much of the southern reaches of the Barataria Basin from the activities of this diversion.
Okay, and just to be clear, wetlands. Nothing usable. Nothing like usable by man, I should say. Like
Correct.
no jackleg's going to put up a subdivision off of what y'all built or what gets built from this.
Well, I would imagine not.
Okay.
But we're talking mostly about wetlands, but we're talking about wetlands that will shield human domains
Right.
from risks associated with flooding and storm surge.
Which ultimately, that's the goal, to protect
Correct.
what we already have. You rebuild the land, it protects us from hurricanes. It also protects us from reversing course of what's already going on out there. He is Dr. Sam Bentley with LSU. Look, we're not done with the overall topic by any stretch. I'm a big I get very intrigued by the whole thing, by the 2023 Coastal Master Plan. So I'm sure we'll be talking in the near future. I appreciate a couple minutes this morning and the information.
Hey, it's a great pleasure. And as we say at LSU, go Tigers.
Go Tigers. Yes.